We are live. Fantastic. Good morning, good morning, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and happy International Day of the Seafarer to all our seafarers. First of all, we want to thank you for joining us on this very important webinar. I think it's very important, and I believe that you will find the content very important as well. My name is Talissa McClure, and I am the Public Communication Officer at the Maritime Administration Department in Guyana. I have an esteemed panel with me. I'm not going to go into who they are as yet. I'm sure you've seen the flyer, but we'll give them a chance to introduce themselves. And I also have on the panel with me this morning our Director General, that is Captain Stephen Thomas, and he is going to share some opening remarks with you guys as well in just a moment. But what I wanted you to know as we go into this discussion today, we are looking at building a harassment-free workplace at sea. So this is especially targeted to both males and females. It's not divisive, but it requires the input of everyone, every seafarer, male and female. How do we build a workplace and environment that is harassment-free? And we know that the maritime industry is governed by a complex web of international conventions that we must be navigated and must be done carefully. And there are national regulations that are designed to ensure the safety of everyone who works on board a vessel, the security, and the general well-being of all seafarers. So today we really want to take some time and to delve a little bit more into how it is that we can go about building this new culture, building a better workspace. Because we know in some cases it's already there, but how do we improve upon what already exists? And for those that are not in places yet, what can we do and how can we make it better for all seafarers? So I trust that as you follow us, whatever questions you have, please feel free to share them in the comment section, and we are going to address them. Just before we end this program, we're going to have a few minutes to respond to all questions. So at any time during the discussion, please feel free to share your questions, and our panelists will take some time to address them so that you can get feedback from us as well. All right, so I'm going to switch us over now before we start and I do the general introduction of every one of our panelists. I'm going to have our Director General, Captain Stephen Thomas, just to share some brief remarks, and then I'm going to introduce you to Vivian Rambrat, Dr. Yvette Johnson, and Courtney Lund, as well as Miss Tiffany Owenkirk. So I'm handing you over now to our Director General, Captain Stephen Thomas, just to share some brief remarks at this point.
Oh, thank you very much, Talisa. Thank you very much, honorable ladies and gentlemen of the panel. Indeed, it's a great day, and this day on which we honor seafarers. Day of the Seafarers 2025, promoting a culture of respect, my harassment-free ship. It's indeed very relevant. It's apt. Since its inception in 2010, when the United Nations declared this day, the 25th of June, as the Day of the Seafarer, the focus was on safety, seafarers' welfare, the role that they played in international trade, and to drive the global economy, security, cruise passengers, and all related issues. Since then, the industry has come a long way. We've made great strides through the prominent role of the member states of the International Maritime Organization. According to our IMO Secretary General, Ms. Aracena Dominguez, the seafarers form a remarkable global workforce that calls ships their place of work. It is a unique, exciting, demanding form of employment, one that must be free from violence and harassment. Thus, the IMO this year is focusing on drawing attention to the urgent need to eliminate bullying and harassment in the maritime industry and to foster a culture of dignity, safety, and inclusion on board every vessel. For us here in Guyana, under the leadership of His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, our president, the maritime sector in Guyana is expanding rapidly, as it's known globally that the Guyana economy concomitantly is growing rapidly. So as a result, we at the Maritime Administration Department, we are fully committed to the ideals of the International Maritime Organization and its member states in this regard and in all regards, ensuring that the ships are hassle-free. We, in terms of having women in the industry, at the Maritime Administration, we are proud to say that over 50% of my management team are female, but unfortunately that doesn't translate to the team and the crews of the various vessels, where we just have very, very few female seafarers. Nevertheless, through some of the initiatives, a particular one with the acronym GOAL, which is Guyana Online Scholarship, the program initiated by His Excellency President Ali, a number of women are pursuing careers to serve at sea. It started a few years ago, so we are not seeing the full benefits of them as yet because they're still cadets in classroom and some are now joining vessels. The Maritime Administration Department is fully in line with the commitment of, as I mentioned earlier, the ideals and objectives of the International Maritime Organization and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 5. Therefore, it is apt that all forms of harassment are brought to the fore and dealt with accordingly so that we can have an enabling environment to facilitate the employment of more women on board vessels. And in conclusion, to prevent all forms of harassment, be it sexual or otherwise. We in Guyana, it's zero tolerance for us. Nevertheless, we don't, as I said, we don't have enough females on our ships, but we are encouraging through the initiative led by His Excellency, our President. We will be there in a few years, and I'm proud of the path that the President of Guyana set and the goals he's given us to ensure that we have women take the rightful place on ships and not just in the administrative capacities in the maritime sector. So thank you all. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director General, Captain Thomas. You know, it is true. I mean, Guyana is just a microcosm of what is represented globally in terms of females in the seafaring industry, as it's represented approximately 1.2% globally, right? But I don't want us to just run away with thinking that when we look at harassment, we're speaking only of females. We're looking at harassment across the board. As you said correctly, Director General, we're speaking sexual and all other forms of harassment. And this can go anyhow, in any direction. All right. So I want to say, so thank you very much once again for those remarks. I want to use this opportunity to invite and to share who our panelists are. And I'm going to invite them in just a few moments to share who they are directly. You'll hear from them directly. So we're going to first of all begin, no particular order, very random. We're going to begin right now with the lone gentleman in our midst this morning, and that is Mr. Courtney Lunge. And he has been involved in the maritime sector for over 30 years. He is currently involved with flag and port state activities for several Caribbean countries. As a naval architect, he provides specialized consultancy through Tsunami Marine Limited, based in Trinidad, and currently serves as the chairman of the Maritime Sector Special Advisory Committee of the National Training Agency, Trinidad and Tobago. He has served on the advisory committee of the Maritime Faculty of the University of Trinidad and Tobago since its inception. As a previous senior ship surveyor with Bureau Veritas and deck officer, this has given him the experience and knowledge to be actively involved in the development of the Caribbean cargo ship safety and small commercial vessel codes for the Caribbean through technical working groups of Caribbean memorandum, through the technical working groups of the CMOU and IMO, the International Maritime Organization. In 1990, he was appointed as a government surveyor of ships on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago's Government Maritime Administration Service and has served in this capacity to date. However, currently, he has been focusing on the development of shipping and marine pollution legislation in the region. So that is our panelists, Courtney Lunge. And then I would like to introduce Dr. Yvette Smith Johnson. And Dr. Johnson is a veteran educator and seasoned maritime education and training professional. She's the Director of Graduate Studies and Research at the Caribbean Maritime University. Dr. Smith Johnson is also President of the Governing Council of the Women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean. In this capacity, she is strategic lead for the WIMAC mission of transforming the maritime industry through the development and participation of women in the sector within the Caribbean. Her passion is the development of people through education, training, and mentorship. She enjoys volunteering to projects that promote the development and education of young people. All right, so again, welcome, Dr. Johnson. Next, we have Vivian Rambarat Parsram, and she's an attorney at law with over 25 years' experience in maritime, environmental, and commercial law. She's currently the regional coordinator leading the Regional Presence Office of the IMO. Prior to this, Vivian served as the assistant professor and program leader of maritime studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. She was also the director and head of MTCC Caribbean and played an instrumental role in the establishment of that technology center. She's widely published in the area of maritime decarbonization and is currently completing her PhD in maritime governance and the blue economy with the IMO Emily. And last but by no means least, I'd like you to welcome Tiffany Oenkirk. She's a legal professional admitted to practice law in 2015. She currently serves as the legal officer at the Maritime Administration Department of Guyana. Tiffany holds a master's in international maritime law from IMO, International Maritime Law Institute, and a master's in public policy and administration from Jane University. She also earned her legal education certificate from Hewlin Law School and an LLB from the University of Guyana. Her experience spans judicial research at the Court of Appeal and private practice at Blackman and Melville PC. She's also volunteered with STEM Guyana and other youth and literacy programs. She's passionate about maritime law and public servants. Tiffany brings a strong academic and professional background to every role she undertakes. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are your esteemed panelists to take us through the program today. I'm going to allow them just a few minutes to say hi and just introduce themselves. I know I spoke a lot, but let me give them a few moments just to say something. And we're going to start with Dr. Smith Johnson.
Well, it's morning where I am. I think it's morning in Ghana still. Good morning, everyone. I am happy to be a part of this esteemed panel, and I will admit upfront that I'm the backdoor person. I'm an educator, not someone who shipping is my mainstay, but working with an METI for almost 20 years and the work with the Women in Maritime Association has given Caribbean and association with people like Vivian has given me sufficient to say here, and I look forward to the wonderful conversation with the people who are really business leaders in this space. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith Johnson. I'll turn to our IMO representative, Vivian Ramrat Parsaram. Please introduce yourself, say a few words for our audience.
Hello and good morning again to everyone. Thank you for providing us with this platform to discuss this very important initiative. And I really think that highlighting the issues related to seafarer rights and their enforcement is very, very important. And it's very heartening to see administrations like yours taking an initiative to have webinars of this nature and to progress the outreach with respect to the maritime conventions and the standards therein. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. And of course, we're going to our gentleman. I don't want to, put him down at the end, right? So I'll throw him in the middle there. Mr. Courtney Lunch, please go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Funded basis of this topic of harassment and inclusive of and paying particular attention to the harassment board and how we negotiate that as a region. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for being a part of the panel as well. And of course, I'm going to hand you over now to Miss Tiffany Owenkirk. Tiffany, please go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to say happy day of the seafarer to all seafarers. I do hope that this discussion will show how, well, we all know how important seafarers are, but I do hope that this panel discussion will enlighten us all on the issues that are now grappling the seafarer industry, and hopefully we can come up with resolutions to solve the problem. If not solve it, but at least guide the discussion to a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Tiffany Owenkirk, and thank you to all of you once again for agreeing and for making the time for us to engage in this discussion this morning. So I want to jump straight into the discussion, and this is a question for everyone. So some will get to take first jump, others will get some time to ruminate on it a little bit more. But this is my question to you. From your professional lens, from where you sit, what does a harassment-free shipboard culture look like? I know it could be many things to many people. So from your point of view, what does that look like? And why is it critical for seafarer welfare and maritime safety? And Tiffany, since you were last on, I will take you first this time. So go ahead and share. Yes, you get the hot seat for now. Let me hear in your mind, what does this look like?
Thank you. A harassment-free ship. As we all know, the life of a seafarer is already hard. Everything done at sea is 10 times harder than a job on land. Most of us, when we come to work, we sign in at 8 and we leave at 4:30. Seafarers do not have that luxury. They stay on board until they call at the next port or until their contract has ended. As such, it's important that whenever one is on board, that they feel safe, they are embraced. And we all know that everyone on board has a different cultural background, a different social background, and all backgrounds and all cultural heritages should be respected and lauded. And in order to ensure that women persons who come from a different cultural background or speak a different language are embraced and feel safe to do their job. A harassment-free ship would be one where everyone could just exist, or rather coexist, and be themselves as they do their jobs. Because as I noted earlier, the job of a seafarer is already hard as is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Wenkirk. So regardless of the differences, you are looking for a culture that is all inclusive and people feel safe at the end of the day. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Johnson, let me hear your thoughts on this.
So thank you for the question, Thalisa. From my interaction with seafarers, a harassment-free workplace on board vessel is not really one that is always going to be free of it, but it is one that has a culture that permits reporting, response, advocacy, and the protection of the person who is deeming themselves to be in a space where they are being harassed. And I thank you, Thalisa, for beginning to say it's not just females and sexual harassment, because I've spoken to many males who, because of their cultural difference, are hounded by colleagues to race and those things matter. And so a ship that is harassment free is going to have, through the ship owners and the company that charters and whatever that ship, a system for reporting, a system for action, and a system for protection. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely. So permits reporting, advocacy, and protection, bottom line, because people need to feel safe that when they report something has happened, there isn't a backlash. They don't feel as if, all of a sudden they're being targeted by others because of what what they said or what is happening with them. Thank you very much. Miss Parsaram, please let me hear your thoughts, and then we're going to go to, I am definitely leaving. This was deliberate. This is deliberate, Mr. Lange. I'm leaving you on this one for last. All right, let me hear from you, Miss Parsaram.
Yeah, I honestly think that harassment-free ships, as the two other speakers indicated, you should be secure in being who you are, whatever race, nationality, cultural background. You should feel secure in existing and being part of an onboard fraternity, and I use fraternity sparingly here, given its gender context. But I would really believe that that security of tenure and understanding your space and that security of space is very important. And backstopping that space and that existence on board, I believe that there is room for flag states to play an important role and for companies to play an important role in ensuring that their employees feel secure while they're on board their vessels. And this goes beyond just the minimum standards that are available through the conventions and compliance with flag and port state requirements. It goes and speaks to a culture of, of a conscious attempt to allow each other to express themselves respectfully, to be able to exist and work together efficiently without any form of discrimination. Without any form of discrimination based on you being female, based on you being of identifying in a different manner from what is mainstream, based on ethnicity. It's that ability to be comfortable in your own skin while working towards the common purpose of the vessel, so that we are not distracted in our tasks based on prejudices.
I like that. I especially like coining we're moving from minimum standard to making a conscious attempt, because I feel many times people figure, okay, once I can check these boxes, then I've done due diligence, right? So I don't need to do more than that. I've completed what I have to do. All right, thank you very much. Mr. Launch, I'm opening the floor. Yes, you can start. Tell
Yes.
me your interpretation. What does a harassment-free space look like?
Well, I have to thank all the ladies around me for bringing out some of the tidbits of what that balance should be. Of course, the IMO is set up, and just to put some framework, the issue of STCW when it comes to basic social skills and responsibilities, some elements within the Maritime Labour Convention that speaks to the issue of equality and culture and us being inclusive, and also the recent focus by the IMO, of course, on the human element. However, in our region, the first thing that we have to do is to be able to embrace that and to have the discussions and conversations regarding that. The maritime sector, of course, is blessed when we see ships with Ukrainians working alongside Russians. We see females and males interacting. The question is, how do we build this culture and enhance it in a way that's meaningful? So, a harassment-free ship, whether for males or females or people of different ethnicities or religious backgrounds, the cornerstone has already been set within the IMO. And of course, we have the RCC, who I'm sure is going to continue with building on that within the region. But the first thing that is necessary is the conversation. The conversation about, okay, because the conversation allows the issues of prejudice to be aired, and if it is aired in a sensible and constructive way, allows us to build on the fabric. Prejudices and biases and the fundamentals of harassment are normally based on a lack of information or a lack of sensitization to issues. So, of course, it's important in our region to start opening up these conversations, whether it is ethnic or religious bases. The story is to start the conversation. And to start exploring the basis of prejudice or the basis of harassment. As Yvette said, it is never possible, and the IMO recognizes, risk can only be reduced to an allowable, acceptable level, but it can't be eliminated. So we will always have the extremists or the people who have absolutely no opinion on the matter. So it is important for us to start these conversations. We have, as a basis to the civilized world, we have the issue of legislation. And I think that Tiffany touched on that. And also Vivian to a certain extent that, yeah, the legislative process is important. And whilst we have the conversation in the social sector, we also have to have the continuous development of legislation that is in alignment in our region to make sure that we can, give effect to our beliefs in terms of social justice. Whether, like I say, well, I think women are an important topic because we do have a certain disposition in the region, which we have to discuss. And also, in general, the issue of more specifically prejudice, because in terms of the worst harassment, whether it be religious or ethnic based, it's a conversation, but we have to back it up with national legislation in a cohesive and comprehensive way. And we're very blessed to have CARICOM as the driver for that. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lund. And yes, we can speak in a vacuum, we can shout from the rooftop, but unless we have the legislation to back it up, we just making noise because nobody will listen at the end of the day, right? Sometimes you need to put some weights on what you say in order to get action. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I want to turn our attention right now to Miss Parsaram. Just two questions quickly I would like you to expound on for us and share some information. And my first one to you is, how how do global maritime conventions, as even Mr. Lange just spoke about, STCW, MLC, and we're looking at 2006, how do these conventions support the creation of safe and respectful work environments at sea?
Well, they had a foundation of it, really. So I'm not saying that this didn't exist prior to 2006 and the STCW convention in 1978, but it certainly provided a minimum standard from which we can all aspire to do better. So let's start with the STCW. The STCW from 1978 created the first international convention that addressed the minimum standards of seafarers certification and also created the first quality assurance framework for maritime education institutions to be monitored by their respective countries. Now, that education and awareness is critical, and it has continuously been updated to reflect contemporary norms and contemporary demands with respect to seafaring. But in many respects, you know, international conventions by nature they're reactive. They regulate based on issues that arise. It's very difficult to be proactive, you know, because you can be accused of creating standards and raising standards unnecessarily, because every standard increases the operating cost sometimes of a vessel. Very rarely you actually find a regulation reduces the operating cost of a vessel. And we know that shipping, it operates by lean margins, and we need shipping to prosper because it's the backbone of international trade. And very often, because of lackluster implementation of these standards, you have the emergence of substandard shipping becoming the norm, particularly in the developing world. So in the Caribbean region, we have a fair amount of shipping that takes place that, you know, we don't have adequate implementation of the standards there. And we have, you know, vessels that sail without STCW recognized officers on board, you know. So, and then we have, because again, we are still building that critical mass of capacity in the region with respect to seafarers. And, you know, once that critical mass is built, that percolates into the shore-based side as well. So we increase the level of expertise that is available for effectively monitoring and administering the maritime sector. But we're not there yet. We're still very new players in terms of maritime education and the STCW. Now, Jamaica leads the way with respect to this because they have full-on implementation of the STCW convention. They have the CMU that delivers training all the way from ratings to support officer to masters and management level certification. Trinidad is still building that competence, and there are a few other entities that are starting to get into that level of training. But as a region, unless we start paying attention to monitoring of these standards that we currently have, we will miss the ball with respect to effectively building the level of competence of seafarers. Because you would find that there are schools that are established that could possibly be, you know, stating that they're qualifying officers, but not necessarily officers that meet the criteria of the STCW. So this again comes back to the flag states and they having the ability to effectively monitor the STCW convention. Now, I can go on at length about STCW. It is my core area, but I won't. Let me look at MLC as well. So MLC provides that Bill of Rights for seafarers. And in that Bill of Rights, again, it provides the basics with respect to employers' responsibility, flag state responsibilities, etc. But one of the things that I feel that is missing, and I feel very strongly about this, is the right to legal representation of the seafarer and that responsibility of legal representation of the seafarer by the ship owners. I mean, for anyone that has studied maritime conventions, you always see the captain and the seafarer the master and the ship owner is responsible, is liable. But you don't see the ship owners in handcuffs. You see the master, and sometimes, increasingly so, you see the chief engineer. So you would see these are the persons that are being held accountable for shipping or accidents related to shipping. And these masters are often left alone. There is nobody that shows up to defend them, except perhaps you might have the ITF and all of these international trade unions coming. But these should be, in my opinion, not the IMO's opinion, my opinion, this should be your last resort to be looking for representation from an international NGO. Your first call when trouble strikes as a seafarer should be your flag, should be even before the flag, your ship owner. Your ship owner should be there to provide the legal representation that you need, that defense. And you would find that that is missing across maritime conventions, and it is missing in the MLC. So while you do have some responsibility there with respect to employers and with respect to flag, it falls short of saying that right of legal representation. You know, you have to go and find your own lawyers if you're arrested out there. You know, so often I've heard from colleagues and from masters that, you know, that when they were arrested, when they traced the flag state, they just met empty offices or a desk, and there wasn't somebody there that would show up for them. They had to reach out to the ITF or to other institutions to seek representation before the courts. So, you know, there is a role for the flags to play. And again, underscoring that these international conventions create that minimum framework from which we aspire to do better. But a lot of times we're so busy trying to meet these international standards that we see them as the benchmark, when in fact they are the minimum standards. So understanding that the region has to aspire beyond the minimum standards, but the framework is there. And if we are to effectively implement the framework, we have a good foundation from which we can build and do better for our seafarers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is not my next question, but just as a thought, you know, so we need to look at how we can get the legislation, because again, basically what it just seems as, whatever is the bare minimum that is written down, that is exactly what is going to be done. How do we get, as Mr. Lon said, we're starting a conversation, but how do we move past the conversation into action so that we can get the Caribbean states, the flag states, and so to actually look at maybe putting something like this in place so that it's not just the engineer, it's not just the masters and so who have to take responsibility, but we have somebody in place who will, you know, and not just the trade unions, right? That, you know, legal representation is open, it's possible, it's a pool you pull from or whatever. So it is something that is, you know, noteworthy of discussion, research, investigation, so we can move forward from this and move just beyond having a conversation. All right, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Ram. Ms. Pastor Ram. So my next question to you before I move off quickly is, based on all of that, what are some tools or maybe some guidance that the IMO has provided that we would be able to tap into, that flag states and ship owners and, you know, would be able to tap into to respond to harassment claims and do so in an effective manner?
Well, again, it comes back to the conventions. These are your core tools, you know, in terms of the flag responsibilities. The STCW and the MLC are your key guidance material. I mean, you can all of this, you know, you can trace responsibility to UNCLOS, and you know, deeper implementation. The IMO has been committed to trying to progress deeper implementation, not just of these conventions, but a lot of conventions in the region. And you know, based on that that foundation, it has tried to provide support based on, say, audit findings where there are deficiencies by member states. The IMO has been trying to implement, you know, based on requests by states. That, you know, again, it is based on a request by a state. The IMO will respond in terms of, whether it's a technical assistance, a workshop, a capacity building workshop, a consultant to assist the region in a particular issue. But, there are so many tools that are available to the region, but it's for the region to prioritize the use of these tools and to prioritize the required legislative reform, because, the region is very much behind, not just in STCW and MLC, but most of the conventions. Even if they do on paper enjoy widespread ratification, the implementation and having the basic legislative framework in place is not where it should be for each of the Caribbean states. So, the IMO has tools as based on the creation of these instruments. It also has many various initiatives that is being implemented. In fact, the very creation of a regional presence office was to facilitate, is a tool of the IMO to facilitate better implementation of the convention and to be more responsive to the needs of the member states in the region and to be able to tailor its response based on a unique perspective and understanding of the region. So the IMO has been creating a framework for better implementation and framework, but a lot of it is still heavily reliant on the member states. Having said that, it's not just all doom and gloom. The Caribbean has a fair amount of sophisticated maritime players, and their commercial contracts, because their commercial contracts are with countries that have implemented and require implementation of these conventions. You would find that some of the shipping, a lot of the shipping that exists within the Caribbean region in terms of international ships that are sailing on international voyages, whether into or outside the region, they do comply with these standards and sometimes even exceed it, because they would have charter parties, they would have contracts with whether it's a multinational firm that requires as a minimum standard that you must have these things in place. And therefore, we do have seafarers through private sector initiatives enjoying a higher level of operation, although they may be operating within jurisdictions and flag states that do not have the required legal framework in place. So it's a bit of a paradox where you have the private sector implementation, meeting and exceeding, but on paper you may have that the flag state do not have these mechanisms in place, but you have private sectors within that jurisdiction demanding a higher level of operation because of their commitments outside of the region. So it is important to understand that, there is a private sector role and there's a public sector role, and there's an international role for the IMO as well. And it is harnessing the initiatives of all of these players that, if we all play to our strengths, we can progress the sector very well, capitalizing on, our sophisticated private sector players, bringing them into the fray, into the key stakeholders that are informing the legislative reform. And the IMO's role, of course, is to see where we can, of course, offer the technical assistance. And one of the things the IMO is also rolling out a new way of working, and it is based on thematic areas, key performance indicators, and outcomes approach, very much outcomes. So, for every technical assistance that is being offered to a country or a region, we need to be able to identify an outcome that has been achieved. So, with this sort of reporting, again, it is a mechanism to push states forward in order to access technical assistance. So it's no longer technical assistance and it ends there. It requires performance arising out of that technical assistance as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And what I like about what you said as well is that within the region, we can, as much as the flag state may not be implementing all of these things, you can look at the private sector and you can see some of the goals to which you need to aspire, right? So rather than checking the bare minimum, these are some, because if they're doing it, then there's no reason why we can't do it. And as you rightly said, IMO has the training and developmental programs that can help to achieve these things. So thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Ms. Parsaram. I want us to engage a little bit our WEMAC representative, that is Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, this next question is for you. And I know we had a chat, before the program about it, a little before, and I'm really interested for the others to hear your take on this. And my first question to you is, in terms of building a harassment-free ship, what are some of the lived realities of women within the maritime sector that should be addressed urgently by employers and regulators within the sector?
Hmm. But Alyssa, the question didn't sound so hard when you were asking me the first time. But that being said, we do have some hair-raising stories from women who have gone to sea. And purposes of anonymity, will say that there are vessels where I've had women coming back from where they didn't feel safe, closing their eyes. I have had stories where women have had to, it is an interesting thing, but they have had to say sleep in several pairs of jeans. So, you'd have to rip through them because of threats and other things. And when I say threats, I should say verbal and other incidents where they felt, I am not safe in this place. Women have spoken to ship's captains and to keep the peace, where a woman wasn't before, that issue did not exist. So when a woman comes on vessel and reports it, there has to be a balance between keeping the peace and keeping her safe. And so things become a little bit dicey. In my experience, I have had discussions with, so that experience in particular was on a commercial vessel. But then we have cruise and we have different applications of the same thing. And I find that where there are more people, there tend to be more transparency. I don't have research data, but I say that anecdotally. In 2024, Thalissa and colleagues, I was invited when there was a Belgian presidency of the EU. I was invited to the Brussels conference on the well-being of the seafarer in my capacity as WEMAC's president. And I was actually asked to sit on the selection panel for the diversity and inclusion awards that were being offered in that conference. And though this is Europe, it's not our dispensation. The lessons are far-reaching and can be transferred to our regional space. I got to review several nominees for that award. And that was kind of eye-opening because that's where I saw that gender is only one data point in diversity and inclusion. And I got to see firsthand what distinguished the recipient of the award from the other nominees. And I think the recipient of the award is known now. It was given to Costa Crociere, which is a holding of Carnival Cruise Lines. And one of the things we noted first up is the important role that education played. And that role was underscored and buttressed by the ship owner. Vivian spoke before about the role. I think not just Vivian, but Mr. Lang was saying the same thing, that the people with whom the buck stop has to make some difficult calls and stand by them. And so the whole line has in its core values the safety and safety from physical to the cultural safety of those on board vessel being fundamental to their operations. And they acknowledge their multicultural environment and that the ship is a melting pot of different cultures experiences and perspectives. And they did several levels of training on board vessel for staff to recognize that everybody has a right to exist in safety in this space. And they did a lot of things to ensure cultural inclusion. Education, though, took a top tier. Everybody coming on vessel to work had an onboarding that demanded a level of education, as signing off on the core values. And discrimination now was managed by processes. So if a person felt discriminated against, the person had a space with which to safely report the discrimination, particularly on board vessel, where they live and work, as was pointed out. There has to be a process that is respected. And like Mr. Lang said, regulation is always there. So the IMO is an amazing space for saying how things ought to be done. But legislation belongs to the small community in which the practice is carried out. And I don't have much local standard here, so I defer to the lawyers on your panel. But each space has to say, this is how we do it. And then they have to police that thing within the space, whether it is a state or a ship, which in its sense is its own state, technically, in spirit, and that there has to be partnership. So when the Diversity and Inclusion Award was handed out, we could see the levels of partnership. Partnership between those sailing and those who are not sailing, but on land somewhere else, is in charge of the quality control of this space. There's open communication, so the steps taken were always clear. It wasn't just a spirit, it was properly codified, and persons knew step 1, step 2. And this was buttressed by the global community, not just the vessel to which the persons on board the ships belong. And so the template is something that we can carry over. Do we have the capacity? I say we do. Do we have the will? The will now has to be something that is agreed to by flag states, by shipping company, ship owners, and we have the global backup from our NGOs and the UN in general and all its subsidiaries, to include, of course, the IMO. What we now need is a local caucus, whether it is in our country or on this vessel. We all have ministries of transport, and I think we will call it different things, but across the spectrum of the Caribbean, we have the gender ministries, we have ministries that speaks to vulnerable communities, whether they are physical or otherwise, disabilities, etc. We have to come together now to say this is what we're looking for. We have the machinery, and I thank our esteemed panelists for pointing that out, of CARICOM. That's 15 of our states, and the overseas states, where we are all agreed we walk better. We have, I love watching movies, and I still, Matt Boland said, if you want to travel fast, travel alone. But if you want to travel far, travel together. When we have caucus on this, we are closer to realizing some of the imperatives that we must put in place for safety of people anywhere in our states and on board our ships. But I want to go back to the point I made as I try again to answer the question, that education is going to be high on the strategies, high on the list of strategies to be used to get all persons respecting other persons. These stories would have us here for an entire day, but I want to believe that in the work we're doing as a region in our different spaces, we are becoming more sensitive to this, not just through regulation, but through our own ethical development as a people. And where we can say in WEMAC, or we have these stories, we are now seeing more and more where females, and I'll go here because of what WEMAC asks for, are being protected in these spaces. There is enough being done? No, it will never be enough until we have a greater percentage of safety than, and when I say a greater percentage, I mean percentage that we arrive at from research and baseline data collection. Until we have a greater percentage of safety and non-threat, it will not be enough. But we are on a roll. We are building momentum, and we want to keep walking towards safety in the shipping space. And we have to, amongst other things, in our small groups and in our legislative national groups, establish and enforce clear anti-harassment policies, say zero tolerance until it is zero tolerance. We want to do gender-sensitive training. And it can be part of the onboarding when, like the Carnival Cruise Lines will tell you, because I've been in a session with them, I've heard from their HR people what is done. There is an onboarding, there is gender sensitive training, and I do need to see other spaces, but I can speak to that space. Of course, we need to set up confidential reporting mechanism, because wherever a person is harassed, whatever gender or other data point that we use, there must be a safe, confidential, and an accessible channel for reporting, accessible. And then on board vessel, it has to be that probably the vessel appoints an anti-harassment officer, as some have done, or an advocate, someone where it is clear that this is a safe space. And then we have to deal with all of the other things that will come as backlash for reporting. So if it means that a person may have to be moved to another vessel, whether the offender or the offended, we have to think of all those things. But, you know, leadership is hardship, and at some point, these actions will be demanded from governments, advocacy groups, ship owners, and the persons who are leaders on board vessels, the captain and whoever else is designated to ensure that vessel goes safely from point A to point B with all the business that is there. And then, of course, we will need all of the persons who are elsewhere, Courtney and Tiffany and Vivian and Yvette and whomever else stays in those offices, to ensure that there is enough talk and action so that the change happens. It may not tumble down on us as an immediate change, but I do believe that we've been walking from a bad place to this a better place, and we should keep walking to our best space. I hope that's some sort of sensible response.
Well, you said a whole lot. You said a whole lot. And there are two things that I want to pull out is that you actually pointed out some of the same sentiments from some of the other panelists. For instance, when Courtland made his initial presentation, he spoke about the fact that education is needed to reduce the prejudice and bias. And in your example with Carnival, that is basically what was done. The onboarding process provided that education that was needed. And they were able to reap the rewards at the end of it. And you also mentioned something that Vivian mentioned as well, is that this did not only affect those that were on sea, but they shifted to those that are on land as well. So it is not just something for when you're out at sea, but it has to be something collaborative, cohesive with those that are on land as well. This is the agenda of the organization, of the industry. So we're looking after everyone. So, I mean, as I said, you said a lot, but it was good stuff. It was good stuff. So thank you. And there's one other thing I want to remind you of before we go into the next question I have for you, is that you had said in our previous conversation is it's also important for everyone to play their part where the shipping industry is concerned in terms of forming, and as you mentioned just now with CARICOM, forming allied groups, alliance groups, so that, you know, everyone, wherever you are in whatever sphere, you can work together to change the thought and the culture and normalize a culture of respect.
And if I could add one thing before we jump off, we non-shipping persons may not understand how many moves go into ensuring safe shipping, right? So shipping persons in their states, and that is now their country territories, have to advocate that government, a minister of land and, what should I say, a minister who deals with the sea, may not even have gone to sea properly. And so the persons who know will have to be the persons who talk to them about what needs to be legislated. You know, when I went to the Brussels conference, there was a minister of the North Sea because commerce is so important to that space. So somebody like Courtney and people like Vivian, and I'm saying it because Courtney gets to go. I don't know if he still does that, you know, because when too much is given, much is expected. But he gets to go on board the vessel and take a look around. If the flag state empowers the look around to look for certain other things, not just the minimum things that the IMO suggests, where's your female bathroom? You know, how many female seafarers do you have? If one takes ill on board, where is that person examined by a medical doctor? Just saying. And if the vessels feel like, okay, when we go into Trinidadian waters, we're going to meet Courtney Lang and he's going to harass us. So the ships that are going that way, let us ensure that they have ABC. So, you know, there's strength in numbers. And that's what we have to start doing together, taking it down, you know, together and making it better. And I do want to always say on back of that, that we are making progress, but we have farther to go. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm happy that after this next question, Courtney is going to come right in. And I know he has a lot to say, but so we're going to come back to him. But what I would like you to touch on very quickly is how can mentorship, because you say we're building a community,
yes.
right? How can mentorship and networking empower women, empower people to speak up about harassment and to really seek the support on board? I know you see we should have officers and so on, but sometimes people feel as if they're in a vacuum. This is happening to them alone. So how can mentorship and networking, how can we empower people to speak up about this?
I thank you for that question because mentorship is close to my heart. We find that newly prepared seafarers, male and female, they you know, there's a mandatory sea time so that they can apply for a license. In training, the IMO demands that engineers do a certain number of months and navigators do another few. But you know, you're kind of protected as a cadet because a vessel that says, okay, we allow for cadet placement will ensure that they are grandfathered, that you know they have somebody looking out for them. But when a newly licensed seafarer goes on board vessel, they are now going to go into the unfiltered new worlds. And mentorship allows for several levels of action. Talisa, mentorship gives a new female seafarer, and I'm trying to, you know, bifurcate now, a little space to improve their emotional intelligence skill set. You know, when you walk the streets and somebody cat calls you, that's not harassment, you know. We have to be a little tougher in, you know. So we have to now be smarter about when does it cross the line, or when do we can't report everything because we can't be the boy who called wolf. So how do we conduct ourselves and how do we see things and see danger without being unfriendly, seeming that kind of thing? Somebody is a little seasoned can give some advice on that. And so mentorship begins not just with the hard skills, but with a kind of appreciation for the new space and give some emotional tools that will strengthen a toolkit of emotional intelligence. That's important. Mentorship mentorship of females does not have to be done by females. But there are some things that are uniquely female, and I leave Courtney to trouble those things that a female may need to hear from another woman on board vessel, may need to hear. And so that too is important. And so I'm speaking to mentorship first at the level of self-understanding. It helps with how I see myself, how I prepare myself for living on board vessel, how I prepare myself emotionally for dealing with a lot of men in close proximity and few women, that sort of thing. And then there is mentorship for the hard skills, mentorship for the navigator, for the engineer, for the rating, mentorship for the crews where the skill set may be a little bit different about how we conduct ourselves with passengers who are very temporary and will disembark at the end of this cruise, and we may never see them again. And so there are levels at which the discussion is had. Mentorship for women who, you know, when MTCC Caribbean and UTT and CMU churns them out with a degree, are going on board vessel, but are looking for moving towards the leadership space. So mentorship for growth. I believe that mentorship and coaching is important. And I want to say from my WEMAC perspective that the Caribbean Shipping Association has entered into a mentorship space with us. We've just finished, Courtney, yes, we have just finished a set of young women, and we're going to do our second phase. And we're asking our other partners, like the Port Management Association, for something similar, not same, but a space where the new graduates, the new entrants can be scaffolded. That's the way you just tip them off. They don't just drop into the space. And if we are truly securing human element continuity, to use your nice seafaring phrases, then we have to have somebody who prepares the next generation. That's where mentorship and coaching comes in. So we should formalize it under our ESG strategies, whether we are government, shipboard, or private shipping company. It's an amazing space from which to ensure that in these changing times, we have people who can carry on our business. So I am here for mentorship. I have 2 pom-poms. I didn't take them up, but mentorship, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Dr. Johnson. And you ended on the mentorship and, you know, in terms of people preparing themselves, new entrants into seafaring, preparing themselves for on board and dealing with, you know, men in a space and so on. So I think that is a very wonderful time to bring in our colleague, Courtney, because I know that he plays an active role in this, as in he also works with a lot of women within this space. So Courtney, I'm going to throw the ball over to you right now. I know we want to talk a little bit about vessel audits and onboard inspection and, you know, how we can include this as harassment risk indicators and red flags. But I also want you to throw in terms of how women especially can prepare themselves when they're going into these spaces, so that you know, you are able to navigate the space in a safe way and avoid risk of harassment. Courtney, over to you.
Thank you, Thalissa. Well, yes, this is a wonderful conversation. First of all, I want to back up a little bit and just give credit to our region and what a strong region we are in terms of the maritime space. You know, we have flags such as the Bahamas. This is Dwayne Hutchinson, Ambassador Dwight Gardner. We have powerful women in the maritime sector. Definitely want to call out Jody Monbaro, who is our CMOU General Secretary, Claudia Pigas, who actually is right now at the top of the pile with our MLC, August 3 at the IMO. We have we must be always proud of how far and how much the Caribbean has done in the maritime space, first of all. And we have huge flags, whether it be St. Vincent, Bahamas, that are of worldwide reputation and are setting some standards. So I just wanted to take some time out to say that. As a practitioner, I have to say that, yes, thank you, Yvette. You said a lot about that mentorship and evolutionary process, and there are some processes already in place. You know, complaints procedures on board vessels, the issue of looking at, and I spoke to that before, how the IMO is continuing under, as Vivian was saying, the issue of the basic training and how we push that forward. So on a practicing issue, I mean, when I do go on board ships and I do audits or I do inspections, I definitely take some time out to find out from the women on board, okay, how do you feel? You know, what's the situation on board? Yvette made an exceptionally important point. Where is the line? Where is the line when it comes to harassment? Well, you know, and that can change from person to person. So that means that we have to have some standardization somehow where we understand that, okay, yeah, this is the line. Maybe a catcall isn't, but if you smack my bottom, it definitely is, and let's be clear about that. So, and then there's also in line with that, the training. Recently I was having a conversation in one of the technical weekend groups, and I said, hey, listen, audit standards. Auditors need to be trained to understand the standard first before you go out and start auditing. And that is what the Vivian was talking about when it comes to TCC and giving us technical support in region. However, we have to start as a region, and I think was Tiffany mentioned it, and so did Yvette, understanding that we have a powerful unit or thing, which is CARICOM, and the alignment of our visions and so on. And actually, CARICOM is one, but also NTA, which each of our CARICOM states has a national training agency. So when it comes to the establishment of standards and then the rolling out of those through a legislative process and the policing, which was brought up as well, which we can, we in the Caribbean forget, we created such great things, Caribbean Court of Justice. We have a forum, we just don't use it. We need to believe in ourselves more, that we've done so much to put on such a great foundation. But just to come back now on the topic of women in the maritime sector and prejudice, because like I say, prejudice, we need to do more education. Prejudice is normally born out of a misunderstanding of ideas, ideologies, principles. But with women, we also have our unique culture in the Caribbean. And I want to focus on the Caribbean. I'm from the Caribbean, I will die in the Caribbean, and there's some uniqueness. About our Caribbean culture, and we're a powerful region. And when it comes to women, the issues relating to how well we treat them. I'm a man, I'm so sorry. We kind of set up a lot of stuff. We put urinals in toilets before we thought about BDs. But we need to change our thinking. The gender bias and the issue of how welcoming do we make our marine environment for women? Well, it starts with really simple stuff. A lot of our shipping, we don't have shipbuilding as a core industry in the Caribbean. So we're buying ships, normally older ships, from other jurisdictions. But then Vivian made the point, there's some responsibility on the ship owners, and also Tiffany made the point, as to, do we take some time before we roll that ship into service to make sure that, yes, we need to have some special facilities to accommodate women, to make them feel welcome. We can't have communal bathrooms because the Caribbean female is very conscious about her body. She not bathing in no common bathroom. Do we take some time to make sure that that environment is set up? Do we take some time in what we're hoping to change as a male-dominated sector into a total gender, how to put it, convenient and embracing sector? Do we take some time to think about our females? And there's simple issues and complex issues. There's simple issues in terms of just understanding that, yes, women are not men. Yeah, there's the menstruation issue. Women are very sensitive about that. How do we treat that in a private way for females on board? It needs to have a thought process. Us men, oh God, I'll get licks for this in the Caribbean. Us men, we also don't take enough time to think it through. That at the end of the day, us men, we have to be thinking, yes, they're females, we want them on board. But did we take the time to think through, okay, the locker for a female needs to be a little bit different from that of a male, and maybe the tabletop and the bathroom needs to accommodate a little bit more. And we need to be more conscious of our thinking about how we embrace women. And it's not the consideration to think, well, to be at sea and be a woman, you have to be like an ex-man. No, that's not the correct thinking. To have women come in and bring that positive side and the advantages of, like I say, simple issue of just being able to multitask. We need to make it convenient, but we need to break down some social barriers. We need to stop thinking about women as sexual objects. Yeah, we need to start not just teaching our women that are joining the sector, but our younger males that are and older males that are in the sector that have certain types of thinking. We need to now educate them as to, no, it must be embracing. Women are equals. and is not, watching Miss World and Miss Universe doesn't cut it in terms of the marine sector. There's an expectation that the women have brains, they process, probably, I know women like to hear that they process better than men, but it's just differently than men. And there is a space for them in the maritime sector. The IMO recognizes that. But now in the Caribbean realm, we also need to have the male thinking, more understanding of that role and how to respect that role. Right now in the Caribbean, we have some powerful women. We've had actually quite a few women are stepping into the roles of leaders within the Caribbean territory. Everybody wants a Barbados prime minister, but now we have a female president also in Suriname. We have another female prime minister here in Trinidad. So we need to start recognizing that and accepting it, embracing it, and in the maritime sector, also accommodating it by having some pre-thought as to, yes, okay, let's really start educating, and as Yvette is saying, having mentoring programs for the men as well to understand and accept that women are equals, and the prejudice and the optic that we have of them first being sexual objects is something that we also need to be re-educated about, and women as well coming into the marine sector to also understand that, yes, okay, we have to do some work, of course, and that's what Vivian and I are collaborating on, because the smaller codes, because there are two sets of trades in the Caribbean. There's our international trade and our intra-regional trade. Yeah, and in our intra-regional trade, we're a wonderful part of the world. We have 2 safety codes, but now we have to start thinking of, okay, how do we incorporate systems that will not eliminate, but definitely reduce the possibilities of prejudice, whether towards women or towards ethnicity or towards political or religious bias. Yes, and the creation of DMAR and the current existence of CMOU are really good drivers and really good foundations. So this whole discussion, is great in terms of ventilating some of the issues and taking it forward. But there are mechanisms that are already in place in the IMO to start that process. Where we as a region take it is the important discussion. Thank you, Thalissa.
No problem, no problem at all, Courtney. But you said something there, and I want that to be the pivot for the next question. In that you were saying, in the Caribbean, we have, our 2 regulations that we go by, and then there's the international. But here is what I want to know. What protocols on board, right, or on board leadership practices, what can we do differently on board within the Caribbean region as we're speaking that can help cultivate a respectful work environment among multinational crews? Because as much as we operate in the Caribbean, we're not just a Caribbean crew, so sometimes we take on from others. So what can be done, what protocols can be done so that we could have that respective culture?
Yes. Well, at the end of the day, like I say, we come from a great region where a lot of pre-thought and pre-thinking does take place. So in the Caribbean now, we've created DMAR. Now, I'm not too sure, but I don't think there is any other part of the world where we've had a collective coming together to start bringing flag state issues. The Caribbean started its sojourn. We were the 4th formed CMOU in the world. And our General Secretary that I spoke about here, Judy Monbaro, really propelled us down the road rapidly, and fantastic job. And then just a few years ago, we sat down and we decided in the region, hey, whoa, we need to develop our flag state issues. Yeah. And Vivian is now with us, and her predecessors took us on a certain path. So the story is that we are now thinking about it, and I'm going to pretend DMAR now is starting to pick up the issues, and that is a flag state forum, because the flag states are actually the movers and shakers. The port state are the checkers. So now, out of the data, and I think it can't remember if it's Tiffany or Yvette, the modern day thinking is data-driven decision making. So there is a need, first of all, to collect the data. And the data was collected by CMOU. The natural process and progress of that thinking has now DMAR. DMAR has now, as a Caribbean collective, and it's not just Caribbean, by the way, because in the Caribbean, we forget that we are very international. The Dutch, the French, and the British are also part of this forum. So they bring that different perspective that, okay, we are predominantly Caribbean, so we have to remind them of that. Well, they're still in the Caribbean, they're not in England. But we are beginning to formulate the first embers of, yes, okay, how can we bring to the fore more equity or equality through our local codes in terms of the recognition of women? Because of the links of the French and the Dutch, we can now make fantastic inputs back into the IMO because they're seated in Europe. And they also bring that other perspective. We also have the U.S. Coast Guard, who are a permanent actor in our MOU, and of late are actually trying to make contributions to our working groups. So we're not there yet. That would not be a correct statement, but we have started taking up, and like I said, it's always beautiful for me to work within the Caribbean, where we do have brilliant minds with great thinking, including these panelists that I'm so happy to sit alongside, to take our process forward in terms of how can we now put some pen to paper and put something in place. So we're starting. That's the answer. We're not there yet, but we're starting. And we have some higher level stuff that's there already in terms of the IMO, ISM code, complaints procedures, and the projection or management of that. But we're still working on nurturing our issue of Caribbean-centric stuff, and how do we get that fully in place.
I appreciate that. I mean, and it's important to know that while, it may not be fully, we may not be fully there yet, it's not as if it's something that is not in train. It's not as if something is not being discussed and a development is being worked on. So thank you so very much for that, Courtney. I'm looking at the time. I know we're a little behind where we should be at this time. There is just before I bring on Tiffany, I just want you to know that there is a very interesting question that I am seeing. We have a couple, but from our audience member that I would really like us to ventilate a little bit before we end, right? We have a few, but there is one that I think piqued me a little bit more than the others that I would love to hear your comments on. All right, so let me throw the ball to Tiffany. Thank you very much once again, Courtney. Tiffany, you are legal, so you're taking it from the standpoint of the legal office. So just share with us a little bit from a legal and regulatory standpoint, what do you see as some of the key challenges in prosecuting or addressing harassment cases reported by seafarers? What do you think, would be, or what do you see as some of the challenges, especially those in international waters or flying a foreign flag? Let's hear from you.
Thank you for that loaded question. There are a plethora of issues. So from a legal standpoint, we can firstly say that there is an international regulatory framework that was devised through the IMO and the ILO, and that is contained in the Maritime Labour Convention. However, the issue is not having an international framework. A major issue, as was alluded to earlier by some of the panelists, is incorporation of these international frameworks. The lack of incorporation of maritime conventions into domestic legislation creates quite a challenge, because if the law is not there to criminalize or create an offense such as harassment or bullying, then there's nothing that can be done to prosecute same. So a major hurdle in combating this issue would be to incorporate the Maritime Labour Convention, the guidelines provided for a safe work environment. You mentioned international waters. that presents another challenge. We have the issue of jurisdiction. Since most of these offenses, such as harassment, bullying, and sexual harassment, they're not what we call offenses of universal jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction offenses such as piracy would allow any state party to prosecute the offenders for such an offense. However, if the ship is on, let's say, the high seas, then the flag state would have complete jurisdiction to deal with that matter. So we have to look at the fact to consider whether that particular flag state would have, one, ratified the Maritime Labour Convention, two, incorporated same into domestic legislation. The absence of that would mean that the flag state would be constrained to intervene in such an issue. As I said earlier, if there's no offense, then there can be no prosecution. Additionally, we have the issue of, again, international waters. Let's say it's in the port of another state. We also have to assess whether that port state, which we all know is the second line of defense for enforcing international conventions. We have to consider whether that particular port state, again, has ratified the relevant conventions to combat harassment. We also have to look at whether they would have incorporated same, or in the absence of that, whether they have any domestic legislation that can be used to address issues of harassment. So in the absence of legislation, we cannot prosecute again. Apart from that, we also would need, apart from the legal standpoint and the regulatory framework, international cooperation. Let's say the seafarer who would have been the offender, or the seafarer who would have been the victim, is a national of another state. How does that state registry get involved? If it's on a foreign ship, then we have to utilize diplomatic channels to see how we can bring the matter to prosecution, or how we can find a way to have a speedy resolution of that issue. So yes, it really is, it requires all hands on deck. It's not just a simple, straightforward resolution. We have to look at it from all sides of the coin: flag state jurisdiction, port state jurisdiction, as well as how the state of nationality can get involved to protect that seafarer who would have been a victim of any form of harassment. I mean, we also have to know that the issue of harassment is not just an issue on board vessels. Even locally in workplaces, Guyana has an issue with prosecuting harassment in workplaces on land. So it really calls for a strong legislative framework, because without that legislation, without that conduct being labeled as an offense, there's no way that it can be prosecuted. The most we can do is speak and address it through other channels such as training, STCW certification, which I know the IMO is actually working on right now, which will come into force in 2026, to ensure that our seafarers are adequately trained on how to deal with these issues. So unless there's anything further, any questions, that's the extent of my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. It caused me to pause. If there is no offense, there can be no prosecution. So if we don't have the legislation in place to say that what you're doing is a matter that requires, you to a conviction, a fine, or whatever, then people will continue to do whatever it is that they're doing. And that brings me full back to Dr. Johnson, which then everyone needs to play their part where shipping is concerned. So flag state, port states, international jurisdiction, wherever, however, everyone needs to play their part if we're going to move this, as if from just a conversation to actually having something happen, and for people to feel protected, men and women, when they are on board vessels, so that harassment can be minimized. As Courtney said, it may not be eliminated completely, but at least it can be minimized. Or at very best, we know that there are channels in which it can be dealt with. It will be an offense, and prosecution will follow. So thank you very much. last question before we get into the question and answer segment is, how can national maritime administrations, therefore, based on what you said, strengthen legal protections and even complaint protections for seafarers who experience harassment? Especially if you're talking about women and young cadets and so on, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, when you take off all of the safeguards, what can be done nationally so that we can strengthen the legal protections for them?
Well, nationally, first, as I would have said earlier, would be the incorporation of the relevant legislation. And as we all know, legislation is not the be it and end it all to any solution. Then comes enforcement, implementation. So the National Maritime Administration departments would have a major role to play in ensuring that proper onboard complaint procedures are in place. The MLC is very clear on this. The provision of an anonymous third party on board who can be the conduit between the ship owner and the seafarer, so that when complaints are placed, first of all, the seafarer feels safe in lodging that complaint without fear of retribution, and to also find a way to have that issue resolved. So it calls for great collaboration within the Maritime Administration Department. I know locally within our Maritime Administration Department, we have the Registrar of Seafarers, who I know is very passionate about ensuring that seafarers feel safe on board. I know she has worked assiduously to ensure that the profile of the office is raised so that seafarers are aware of such an office and that they can come to that office to lodge their complaint safely, and a resolution can be forged through that office. So nationally, it requires largely on the part of the administration departments to have a complaint procedure to ensure that their ship owners enforce a complaint procedure on board, so that that seafarer, be it a young woman, a female seafarer, or a man who feels that he has been prejudiced, once there is that complaint procedure on board where they can anonymously lodge a complaint so that it can be forwarded and a resolution can be made, and also on the landward side through the office of the Registrar of Seafarers. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Tiffany. I really appreciate that. And I thank you. It's a lot, but yes, legislation, again, it just comes back to the same thing. Legislation is important in terms of just making sure at least the ship owners and everybody are involved in the process. Thank you so very much for that contribution. I'd also like to thank Miss Vivian. Vivian Parsaram for responding to Stephen's question in the chat. If you haven't had a chance to go look at it, please do. He was asking about whether STCW, as it is right now, adequately prepares young men and seafarers to deal with the challenges out there. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but thank you very much, Vivian, for responding. Dr. Johnson, I just want to pull you back in just for one quick question. Just tell me, what role can male allies play in helping to create safer shipboard environments for women, especially in leadership or mentoring roles? Right up your alley.
Thank you for that question. And when Courtney made his list, so let's take Jody off that list for one fraction of a moment. Names like Peter Brady and Dwight Gardner are champions of women's growth in this region. And there are other names, and I would love to getting myself into trouble by saying Colin Young, Bertrand Smith, but I'll stop now because I don't want to be outcast. These men sit in the corridor, walk in the corridors of power, and sit in the seats of power and enable women to become their best selves in the spaces. Jamaica has its first female chief of defense staff. She is from the Coast Guard. She came up through the ranks, and she was Rear Admiral Antoinette Weems Gorman. She has had a promotion since that. Her mentor, and openly she says it, was Admiral Peter Brady when he was Chief of Defense Staff. We grow when those who are standing above the station to which we want to get extend their hands and pull us up. The men are already there, and that's why there's a Women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean, and that's why the IMO Gender Program has in all 8 WEMAs across the globe. If the men who are in those spaces continue to do what they have been doing, we are here because they're there. If we get some more of them there, then there'll be more of us at the table. And I hasten to say that we are seeking for equality and equity, not dominance or anything like that. And it is always truthfully, Talisa, the person who can level the playing field is the person who stands a little higher than those who need to be pulled up. So while there is now an emerging space for women to become coaches and mentors, we have to recognize that those women are there, a pearl girding in Suriname, because there was somebody ahead of Pearl who was male who says, give Pearl the job. And so we're looking for more spaces where men are unthreatened. I'm using that word, and where men are magnanimous in spirit and fair in conduct, to allow women, not by token, never by token, but women who are competent and women who are the best men for the job to get the job. So the role of men is to continue to empower and continue to pull up everyone who has the capacity to grow in this space, and especially the women who would stay hidden or would doubt themselves if they weren't the ones to say, come forward, walk forward. So yeah, that's my short answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Thank you so much for that. I want to throw this one to Courtney. This is another question we have for you. Have you encountered any ships that demonstrated best practices in preventing harassment? And if so, what stood out during your inspection?
Yes. I'm not going to call company names, but as an ISM auditor, I did have, and I'll say that the company is based in the Caribbean and works in the Caribbean. And there was an issue of harassment, and that Caribbean-based company utilized the complaints procedure, which is part of MLC, and in a very fair and objective way during the audit I did on the process, was able to. So we have the capabilities by ship owners and companies in the Caribbean to actually do a fair and unbiased assessment of harassment. And in fact, the outcome for that company was, yes, both the offender and the offendee were separated and placed in different parts on different ships rather. And so yes, and thank you, Yvette. Our belief in our system has sometimes got to do with the belief in our people. And that's important for us to keep repeating and understanding. We are a blessed and powerful region. That was so well said, Yvette. The men, as you say, the Dwight Gardners, the Colin Youngs, yes, they did reach out and pull people up, Peter Brady. So I don't know. So for me, yes. So I have experienced that. I have experienced what I will call a very good outcome. It was in an unbiased way within the Caribbean, and I think that, yeah, kudos to us in the Caribbean for having a proliferation of people who respect and understand and police the issues regarding prejudice, and in particular females. WEMAC, I know your first president at WEMAC, that would have been Dwynette Eversley, am I right, Yvette?
Dwynette was number 2. It was Claudia Grant.
Claudia Grant, yes, and I got it
Right.
wrong. Vivian corrected me on that. It's not Claudia Piga. She's a designer. Claudia Grant, and powerful woman. And to me, Claudia, she's the humblest of persons, you know. So yeah, we sometimes have to also take a look at ourselves and say that we've had greats and we continue to have greats in the Caribbean maritime sector. And even having a forum like this is still a testimony to how we go forward and thinking through. I was listening to, I just want to go back and talk a little bit about what Tiffany said, because you really give a hard question there to listen. That was a hard question, but you handled it so well. And this issue about jurisdictional stories in international waters is a conundrum that the world does think about. You know, people sometimes fail to understand that, you know, something like UNCLOS, you'd have thought everybody signs up. But for example, the US hasn't signed off on UNCLOS. And in the Caribbean, we have to now figure out something about this international space. When the IMO and Vivian's predecessor decided to take on board the issue of the Caribbean trading area, you know, there is something that says that the higher level thinkers now need to take the CTA into a forum like CARICOM and then extend it to a legal jurisdiction such as the Caribbean Court of Justice and put some framework to that. So at least us as a region, we're thinking about it, addressing it, because Tiffany articulated it perfectly. You're kind of in a gray area when you have international waters, a flag state is involved and a port state is involved, and even the nationality of the people. So we need to have a lot of higher level thinkers treated that. But the Caribbean is doing great when it comes to, in my opinion, it's not great, I take that back. The Caribbean has been coping satisfactorily with addressing the issues of prejudice. There's always more work to be done. And I can attest to the fact that I have objective evidence of that being so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Courtney. And we are so out of time, but I want to do one final question, round robin, and then we're going to do the wrap up. So we'll start with you, Courtney, since you're already on the floor. If you could implement one immediate change, 30 seconds to answer, one immediate change, whether regulatory, cultural, or operational, that would reduce harassment at sea, what would it be?
It would be an addition to the Maritime Labour Convention regarding the specific story of harassment. There is a thing called the DMLC Part 1 where the flag state declares its laws regarding or what is taken on board regarding seafarers' rights. So yes, that would be it, to have that funneled through the MLC and DMLC1 regarding specifics of harassment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much. Miss Parsuram, Vivian, your question, same thing. If you could implement one immediate change, whether regulatory, cultural, or operational, to reduce harassment at sea, what would it be?
I would like to see seafarers having the right to legal representation by ship owners.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. Dr. Johnson, I'm throwing this back to you now. Same question.
Thank you. I'd like somewhere in our collective space use CARICOM that for us to have an ambassador to treat with this and other issues. It's like an ombudsman, an office where becomes the locus for all the complaints and the investigations. So we could have aggregate data on the thing and also aggregate action.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Tiffany, your turn. One change, immediate change, regulatory, cultural, or operational. What would it be?
Well, for me, it goes without saying. The immediate change for me would be to criminalize, or not necessarily criminalize, but make harassment an offense. Because once we have the offense, then prosecution can be had and sanctions. Because we know a lot of people, as what alluded earlier, we act until something happens, and a lot of people don't take things seriously unless there's a sanction behind it. So for me, it would be the creation of the offense of harassment.
Thank you so very much, Tiffany, and thank you. So that's it. I'm not going to ask any more questions. That is the end of it. I know I have kept you beyond our agreed time, initial time, but I want to thank you so very much for the salient points that came out from this discussion. And it really is food for thought. It really is ground for legislation and further discussion and ventilation. And it's an opportunity for those that sit in the seat of the movers and shakers to be able to take this information and see how we can address these concerns so that we can make lives better all around for our seafarers, especially those that fall within the vulnerable category. But it's not my job to do the thank you. But so I just wanted to say thank you and step away. And I'm going to invite our registrar of Seafarer, that is Miss Katina Ben, just to step up and so she can share her final. She can do the wrap up as well as share any other insights or comments that she would like to bring to the fore at this point in time. Katina?
Thank you so much, Talisa. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to extend deepest thanks to all our panelists for joining us in this discussion this morning, this very, very important discussion. When we were thinking about who we should include as part of the panel for today's discussion, it was without question the persons who are here with us. And I think your insight from your professional standpoint, it brought a different perspective to the discussion, and we really, really appreciate that. We also wish to thank everyone who took time out to attend the webinar. I hope they are key takeaways that you all will ponder on and probably even work with your companies, for those who are from shipping companies who are part of this webinar this morning. Work with your companies to see how best we can tackle this issue of harassment at sea. I thank you once again and have a great rest of the morning.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. Bye.
Bye.